Chapter 1. When Alexandra Blackstone woke, she glanced around, blinked her eyes a few times and tried opening her mouth. She felt different. Relaxed. Renewed. She admitted that this was perhaps the best feeling she has had in a long time with Max. No doubt he had outdone himself, she thought. She could tell because her body wasn't tense and needy. She knew that feeling of lack of satisfaction, and clearly her desire for an orgasm had been fulfilled. Alex let out a sigh. She didn't want this session with Max to end so soon. She would beg him to stay with her in bed, and not go to his meetings before they head out to their home in Montana, and to their children patiently waiting for them. They had planned a trip to Colorado, and they could get in some skiing, where Maxim would have his first lessons on the slopes. One more day was all she needed with her beautiful husband, but she did understand her role as a mother. But she wanted just one more day with this fascinating and mesmerizing man, her husband, Mr. Black. She thought it was nothing wrong with having him to herself, just this one last time, because she had never had that opportunity before. There was his businesses that came before her, and between them. And then the children. Now was her last opportunity to do the things they wanted to do to each other. She no longer had barriers and restrictions she once had. He promised her that many of his properties, hotels and casinos, would be sold, and he could be with her the way she wanted and had dreamed since she first met him. She tried raising her arms. They were tied down with black silk ribbon. She smiled. Then she looked up at the ceiling. She didn't recognize the light fixture in her bedroom. Maybe someone changed it when she was away visiting in New York. But this room reminded her of her high-rise apartment in Manhattan, with the high ceilings and crown moldings, large dazzling ornamental chandeliers setting in the middle of the ceiling of each room. Yes, there were large chandeliers throughout her New York apartment, but this one, although large, was different. But she had closed up the apartment. Max had sold the building, and she and Max with the children had moved back to Montana. There wasn't anything in her Montana home that reminded her of New York. The two homes were as different as night and day. Her Montana home, in the middle of an isolated forest, had redwood beams in the ceiling, heated wood floors, and a large fireplace in her bedroom. But there were no such fireplace here. Before she left New York, she tossed and gave away everything that reminded her of New York, except the children's toys. She wanted to forget she was ever there. She wanted to forget what happened in New York. Alex tried moving her head and body. Looking down, she noticed that the sheets were different. She slept on high-count Egyptian sheets, but from what she could see, these sheets were satin. Black satin sheets. Still, she thought maybe she was confused. Maybe the maid had gone against her wishes and decided to use the satin ones. Max preferred black satin sheets. He liked the feel, and they were more conducive to his movement and to hers. But that wouldn't account for the room with furniture she didn't recognize. She didn't remember any of this. Not even sex with Max. She only felt his presence in her body as she twisted around. She moaned from the pain and pleasure of it all. The bed, a large four-poster bed with polished dark wood, and a large dresser and chest. It was obvious she wasn't in their playroom. She and Max's playroom is filled with the latest sex toys, which Max brought back from his visit to Asia. She moved her head to the right, searching for the cushioned tables she stretched out on, where he would tie her down and seduce her body with his warm kiss before he would have his way with her, at her begging and pleading. Turning her head and eyes to the left and to the right, she tried opening her mouth to speak, and it was strapped with soft leather and a ball in the center. She couldn't yell. She made a gurgling sound. She heard the shower. Soon she would see Max coming out of the shower, and she would scold him for letting her lay in this position all night, and for permitting her to drink too much, and for taking her to one of his hotels. Alex couldn't wait to tell him off for being over-anxious, because she felt sore in front and in back. She wished her hands were free. When the shower turned off and she no longer heard the water flowing, she waited for Max to come strutting out with his fine body, his large manhood still full, and she would play a game with him. Alex would pretend she didn't want him to take her again, and he would crawl between her legs and perform oral sex on her, and she would have another orgasm, and then he would untie her, and she would be well satisfied until the next time. And that would be a clear indication that he had planned to leave her and the children once more. She waited and waited for him to saunter into the room and begin kissing her nipples. But nothing. There was a strained silence. Too much of a silence. Where could he have gone, and why would he do this? Was it to punish her for her misdeeds and her obvious attraction to Robert? Was it because of her conspiring with Jonas to cover up his involvement with Miranda's accidental death at his club? Her mind raced because she couldn't imagine Max tying her up to a bed this long and then disappearing. No, that wasn't like Max to be angry this long. With Max, when something was over, it was over. Never any what-ifs. Maybe he had to take a call on that damn phone that never gives them a break. He never shuts that fucking thing off, she thought. Then Alex became annoyed. How could he leave her like this, tied to a bed, and her feet bound with a gag in her mouth? This is outrageous. She needed to go to the restroom. She didn't understand. Not one damn bit did she understand this. And to leave her like this. In a strange suite in one of his hotels. One she had never been in. She wondered how many of these hotels did he have. This one he would have to sell as soon as he untied her. She wasn't enjoying this experience at all. Time was running out, and she had to make sure everything was removed from their New York apartment, and papers had to be signed to turn over the apartment to the new owners. She had to catch a flight, and he had to leave too, and they would meet up in New York before they went home together to Montana. He planned meetings with his lawyers for her to sign papers. When they would see each other again, most of his hotels and businesses would be sold, and they would return home together and start a new life with their children, and she would have her incredible handsome man to herself, and her children would have a father, not one who they happened to see on television or in the newspapers. Alex needed her living and breathing stimulating man beside her at night, if she had a notion to make love to him. She had been looking forward to the move. Getting out of New York had been at the top of her list since the death of Robert and the young Eurasian woman. Now she remembered that Max would need to stop in San Francisco. Something about a problem with tenants at his Millennium Hotel. Then his trip would take him to the Orient, and they would be home and together before the holidays. He would fly straight to New York after he had sold his business and help her with the apartment. But they weren't in their apartment now, and she didn't remember anything that led up to her being nude and tied up in this strange place. Alex strained to remember that Jonas flew to San Francisco to be with Crystal and their baby, with a directive from Max, because of the mess Jonas created for Alex and Max. She remembered Max shouting at Jonas, "Under no circumstances will any of this happen again. I don't want to talk about this, or hear about this anymore. And if for any reason you manage to do anything that will involve Alex, and anything else happens to you, that you've created, I won't be there to get you out of that mess. Because this is it. This is the last time, Jonas. I'm tired of covering up your crazy fiascos. You are toxic. I have children to think about," Max had said. Jonas just stood there blinking his large green eyes and raking his hand through his dark curls and then tugging at his shirt nervously. Jonas sat looking up at Max, and Max, standing looming over Jonas. With Jonas's hands shaking, he stood and walked around the apartment in a nervous pace. Lit a cigarette with a gold lighter he didn't recognize, and stared at it as if wondering how it worked. Flicking it open and close until Max snatched it from his hands. "Do you understand?" Max said, his voice hard. "I understand," Jonas said, confused, as if he was a small child being threatened by his father for playing too long at a friend's house. Still not understanding the gravity of the problems he had created for everyone. Alex remembered all of this, but why wasn't she aware of being bound to a bed she didn't recognize? The door positioned behind her with the bed facing a wall filled with silk beige curtains opened, and she heard footsteps. She heard his shoes and a soft squeak and scuff from the sound they made on the wood floor. His stride long. She managed to turn her head as he passed, and she caught sight of him only up to his waist. He wore an expensive designer dark blue suit. The kind she had seen Max wear. And for a moment, she thought it was him. Continuing past the bed, he sauntered to the curtains and hit a button, and the beige curtains slowly made a low humming noise, and they moved like a line of dominoes falling to reveal the New York skyline. There in a distance, she could see the Chrysler Building. "This is fantastic, isn't it?" the man said. His voice husky and sexy. "I feel like $1 billion this morning." He took a large breath as he stood leaning and looking out of the panoramic windows. He stood like a statue in one place, and then he turned with a jolt. He stood tall. He was handsome, square jaw and coarse dark hair with thick eyebrows over brown probing eyes. His body impressive with a light blue shirt under an expensive blue suit. She could see him clearly now that the curtains were opened. Alex's eyes wide. She struggled to talk. She made a garbled, distorted sound, a spitting sound almost choking. The man wandered over to her and sat on the side of her as she tossed trying to get free. His eyes measuring and watching at her breasts, then regarding her down to her genital area and thighs. He leaned over her as if he would kiss her, and she turned her head, but he released the gag in her mouth. "What are you doing to me, Robert?" She blinked her eyes nervously. "Max said you were dead," she whispered as if she didn't want to hear her own words. The man turned his head at an angle and looked at her with a cool smile. "Of course Robert's dead," he said, slow and measured, as if he's an actor rehearsing his lines trying to feel something. "But who are you?" Alex said, narrowing her eyes. "Isn't it obvious?" he said, none threatening. He passed his finger over her forehead to push a single strand of long hair from her face. She flinched. "I'm his brother. His twin brother, Ross. And isn't it ironic that Maximilian has a twin and he killed my twin? I wonder what he'll say when he finds out there's another one to make his life miserable. I wonder what he'll say if I kill his twin." His voice calm. He slanted his head and gave her a closed smile. "You can't do that. You can't kill Jonas." "No, I can't. I'm not like your husband. And besides, Maximilian might thank me for getting rid of that useless brother of his." "I don't want to make his life easy," the man said, as if he was bored and couldn't think of anything else to do. "His life won't be the best when he discovers that you're missing. And about you and me. If he ever does." "What about me and you? What is there to find out?" Alex said, her voice elevated and cracked. "Just look at you, naked and beautiful," he said, trailing a finger over her nipple and watching it respond to his touch. His breathing intense. His mouth opened slightly as he stares down at her. I don't remember any of this, she says, as her eyes travel to her feet, her legs opened wide and tied neatly with black ribbon on each side of the bed. Oh, that. I collect ribbon. It's strong and doesn't blemish the skin. And what beautiful skin you have, the man said as if rehearsing a play for Little Red Robin Hood, and he was featured as the big bad wolf.